Alright everybody, we have a Patreon request today. By the way, my name is Sarah, aka Sogal. Scarlett is down below me panting right now, and this is Roger. Basso Sovietico 1987 is the one who requested this over on Patreon. He says that you are constantly amazed with the role of horses in World War II. This is the Indian Idol special episode from his channel World War II about a surprisingly effective way to use the cavalry by the Soviet Red Army in 1942. I actually didn't know horses were used in World War II until I started watching videos on this channel. I found that out from all of you. And that is because the US view does not equal horses. I grew up watching World War II movies, very American-centric, but I think they were pretty much all American-made, maybe a British one here or there. You know, the United States, from what you guys have taught me, did not use horses. It was all mechanized at that point. I think Britain was similar to that. I'm not sure if there were other militaries that were also 100% mechanized. If so, let me know down in the comments. But to my astonishment, I found out that there were a lot of horses actually used by Germany and the Soviets especially. I'm not sure what Germany's reason was, because when you think of Germany, I just think of like brilliant engineering and stuff, so it kind of surprises me that they also were not 100% mechanized in World War II. But anyway, since then I have seen videos with footage of horses, and it's just such an anachronistic thing for me. I guess because my entire life I have viewed World War II as like a completely modern war, and to see horses all of a sudden, it's just kind of like mind-blowing. Now the title of this video is called Carica. I had to look this up, and I found out that it is Italian and it means charge in Italian, so a very appropriate title, I guess. So I mentioned that Germany and the Soviets used the horses. So what other countries also use the horses? That is kind of what my question is about that. They might touch on, you know, like the different ones that use them here. Were there other armies, other militaries in Europe that used horses? I just kind of like want to know like how widespread was the horse usage still in the 1940s. Lastly, my question is, how do cavalry charges work in a modern war where there are tanks? I don't know, there's a lot of you know, modern equipment that can be used for defense and stuff, so how in the world do horses go up against that? Or did they just like go up against infantry? I mean, like, in my head it shouldn't even be possible for a horse to even get close to a modern army because, you know, I just feel like the modern weaponry is too formidable, I guess, for a cavalry, but obviously not. Like, obviously they were used to some effect in World War II, otherwise they wouldn't have done it. So I am interested in like battle tactics and stuff, and I learned a lot of that with like the Napoleon videos that I did. So this should be an interesting, I haven't really looked at the cavalry anyway, so this should be interesting to learn about. I do have a soft spot for animals though, so I'm not looking forward to seeing horses die. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's check out how the heck did the cavalry work in World War II. By the way, I will be jotting down some notes during this if there's anything that I want to remember or have a question or something I want to bring up. So if you see me doing that, I am paying attention. Just want to let you know.
The cavalry attack left a strange impression on all of us. To begin with, we did not take the attack seriously. It was too much like a joke. But before long, we were unpleasantly surprised by the effect it had on our morale. The rapid succession of attacking waves was unnerving, and the bravery of the Russians was uncanny. Only the protective shields of the guns saved us from the bullets of the submachine guns, which the horsemen fired from the saddle at full gallop. Later, when our men moved into new positions, their knees were still shaking.
Oh. I'm so dumb. When I think about cavalry, my brain just goes right back to the 19th century where the cavalry, the guys on the horses have like swords and stuff. Why did I not think that they would have like guns, like machine guns, that they would be? But that has to be hard, right? Because you're at a full gallop probably trying to shoot a machine gun.
I'm Indy Nidell. This is a World War II in real-time special on cavalry, specifically Eastern Front cavalry in World War II. Those who studied war in the mid and late 19th century well knew that warfare had changed. Long-range artillery and quick-firing muskets and then rifles shot down frontal cavalry attacks. Gone were the days of Napoleon and of the gallant cavalry attacks that stormed the enemy at a full gallop with lances lowered and sabers drawn. Those generals who still hoped to relive the glory of the past in the early 20th century saw their horsemen destroyed by the shells and machine guns of the Great War. However, while most nations began replacing their cavalry with bicycles, motorcycles, trucks, and tanks, a few were still considering the cavalry alternative. Russian and then Soviet military planners looked long and hard at the American Civil War. Both the Union and the Confederacy had used cavalry units for extensive raids into enemy territory. They sabotaged railway lines and telegraph lines. They attacked outposts, acquired intelligence, or simply terrorized the enemy rear. Any future conflict on Soviet territory would likely be fought over vast distances, over swamps, forests, and open steppes. In fact, already back in 1876, the Imperial Russian Army had staged a cavalry raid after the American model. The results were so impressive that the term raid was adapted into official Russian military terminology. General Prince Galitzin wrote, "The Americans transmuted into reality the cavalryman's most celestial dreams, and our cavalry is the only one in Europe which can emulate them." The Russians...
Okay, so I had no idea that Russia did this, that they studied American cavalry techniques in the Civil War. I mean, I guess what works, right? You know, the American Civil War was still using almost Napoleonic type tactics. I mean, if you've seen any movies or whatever, documentaries about it, you know that they fought in rows, like we saw in the early 1800s, 1700s, all of that. My first thought would not be to go back to the Civil War to look for tactics in World War II, although I guess there are some military tactics that have stayed true all through the millennia. I don't know, that just seems odd to me. But maybe they were taking into consideration a lot of their geography, like he was talking about swamps, steppes, and all of that stuff. It'd be hard to transport, you know, trucks and stuff over that kind of land. So maybe cavalry would be more reliable in some sense. I wonder what caused them to gravitate to the Civil War over here in the US. Was there any particular reason that they looked to that war for certain tactics, you know, versus like another European country, like another European war or something like that?
The Civil War had proved those predictions to be accurate. And Joseph Stalin, who himself had been a commissar in the Red First Cavalry Army, is keen on keeping the Soviet cavalry prepared for a modern strategic role. Cavalry formations, strongly supported by airplanes, tanks, and armored cars, will have operational strategic tasks to perform. Wide encirclement of the enemy and the capture of his most important strategic, economic, and political centers, as well as tactical tasks such as the final disorganization and destruction of retreating and defeated enemy troops. So, while the interwar Soviet civil economy is generally replacing the horse in favor of the motor car, the horse breeding programs of the Soviet military are rapidly extended. Under the leadership of veteran cavalryman Field Marshal Semyon Budyonny, the Soviet horse breeding farms produced nearly 950,000 foals in 1934. That number rises to 2,050,000 2 years later. That means by the outbreak of the Second World War, the Soviet Union is able to field 13 cavalry divisions and quickly raise a reserve of 20 more. Unlike in what...
How many horses are in a division? I still haven't gotten all of that down yet.
Western Europe, where horses are generally born and bred in barns, the steeds of the East are traditionally bred on the open steppe. There, they acclimatize to the harsh weather conditions and develop thick winter coats to withstand the cold temperatures. Many horses are raised along the Don River and crossbred with English thoroughbreds. With a minimum size of 14.2 hands, Don horses can travel 100 kilometers a night on forced marches or cross wide flowing rivers without problems.
On my last Patreon chat that I did, somebody, I can't remember who it was, showed or told me that horses are measured in hands or something. I'd never heard of that before. This is the second time I'm hearing about that. I still have no idea what that is. I guess you stack your hand up on and you measure, I forgot what part you measure. Do you measure up to their shoulder or something like that? Yeah, I'd never heard of that before.
Or cross wide flowing rivers without problems. Much of the Red Cavalry's image is modeled after the Cossacks, men traditionally skilled in riding and maintaining horses. Although politically discriminated against in the Soviet Union, their esprit de corps is still highly valued. During the Jigotovka, the mounted combat exercises, each rider must perform several feats like recovering items from the field at a full gallop, dismounting at a dead run, or laying down on the horse for cover. Training focuses on the individual skills of horsemanship, marksmanship, and yes, swordsmanship. Although many nations have abandoned the saber in favor of the carbine, Soviet cavalry still embraces them, because when operating in the rear of the enemy against unprepared outposts and villages, surprised men are likely to panic and flee, turning their backs on the sabers of the cavalrymen. But to enhance...
I can understand that. What is a carbine, though? Is that a... I mean, the closest thing I can think of it to it is the bayonet, I guess, but they would have had those back in like Civil War era too. I've heard of the carbine before. How do you spell it? Is it carbine or I don't know.
And flee, turning their backs on the sabers of the cavalrymen. But to enhance and modernize their combat power, cavalrymen are also outfitted with hand grenades and submachine guns. So the Red Cavalry also fields dedicated grenadier and light machine gun squads. The natural advantage of cavalry in warfare is in its operational maneuverability, right? Cavalrymen are fast and mobile. They can be used almost anywhere. Horses can cross swamps, mountain passes, and dense forests where armor cannot. Horses also do not need gasoline or spare parts and can forage in the countryside. The obvious weakness is that cavalry cannot carry heavy firepower and has extremely limited anti-tank fighting capability. Also, attacking an entrenched and alert enemy is still suicide. So Soviet doctrine demands that mounted attacks should only be launched when the circumstances are favorable, meaning when the enemy is weak, unaware, or disorganized. That, of course, needs experienced officers on the ground who can gauge the enemy's strength and the terrain for a successful charge. In practice, a typical cavalry attack at the corps level consists of several phases. At first, the horsemen assemble under cover of darkness. After a sudden artillery barrage to suppress enemy fire, the cavalry then attack the enemy lines with tank support. Once the enemy lines are penetrated, the two lead divisions dismount and hold, while the second echelon division rides through the breach into the enemy's rear. Then the cavalrymen have options. They can turn and strike the enemy flanks, execute a parallel pursuit against a fleeing enemy, or drive deep into the rear. Cavalry can fight independently at an operational depth of up to 60 kilometers behind enemy lines. There, they can destroy key rail junctions, blockade road intersections, or prevent the enemy from shifting operational reserves or reestablishing a defensive line. It is not just the Soviets who use cavalry, though. The Germans do. Despite the German fleets of tanks, motorcycles, and APC formations, the armies still predominantly rely on horses. In 1941, the Wehrmacht is supported by 50,000 cavalry mounts and 910,000 draft and pack horses. That's nearly 1 million horses. The German military has its own horse farms as well, where the focus is on quality, not quantity. Men spend up to 3,000 hours of riding training, as well as training in reconnaissance, scouting, infantry tactics. A training routine is up to 100 kilometers in the saddle, with horses carrying 250 pounds of weight. While this very much does create a cadre of excellent cavalrymen, the pool of it, however, is small and is concentrated mostly in the German 1st Cavalry Division, commanded by General Kurt Feld. They accompany Army Group Center during Operation Barbarossa and fight at the edge of the Pripyat marshes. But while German cavalry is very efficient in a supporting role, the harsh Russian winter takes a terrible toll. The pampered horses cannot deal with temperatures down to below -20 Celsius. Without adequate shelter, many freeze to death or collapse from the absence of basic accessories like winter shoes. As the German logistics system breaks down, more and more horses are forced to carry heavier and heavier loads, and more collapse from lack of forage and from exhaustion. Over 180,000 horses are lost over the winter of 1941 and 42. To restore some mobility, the rest of the carefully bred horses are relocated to non-cavalry units as pack and draft animals, where their specific skill and training are wasted. The Waffen-SS formed their own cavalry squadrons, but that is more of a last-minute effort by Hermann Fegelein to include an exclusive group of cavalrymen in the war in the East. Their initial combat value is pretty low, suffering high casualties in combat operations near Rzew, where whole squadrons are wiped out because they have not had enough cavalry combat training. This leads to the use of SS cavalry brigades as support of the SS Einsatzgruppen and, in general, in the pacification of the hinterland, which involves anti-partisan warfare as well. This is a whole separate story, and Spartacus covers this on the War Against Humanity subseries. Other Axis powers field cavalry brigades too, which serve both as frontline units or even as police forces in the rear. Romania brings in 6 brigades, Hungary and Italy each field 2. They are supplemented by horse artillery or dedicated recon units. These units are small but well trained with strong traditions and commanded by veterans. In fact, the cavalry of the Italian Expeditionary Corps executes a remarkable charge in 1942, one of the last successful cavalry charges in military history. Some say the last one, although there is the Battle of Schoenfeld in 1945 for cavalry enthusiasts. In the late afternoon of August 23rd, the Italian Savoy Cavalleria Regiment reaches the outskirts of Izbushensky village near the Don River. There has been heavy fighting in the area, with the outgunned Italian 2nd Infantry Division hard-pressed and close to breaking. As the night comes, the Soviets occupy the strategically important Hill 213, setting up mortars and entrenching machine guns. The Italians fear that an attack the next day will smash their lines. The only force available to prevent that is the Savoia Cavalleria, around 600 men strong and led by Colonnello Alessandro Bettone Casago. The Savoia, with a history reaching back centuries, still proudly wear traditional red neckties and brandish curved sabers. That night, Colonel Bettone forms a daring plan. If he can get his cavalry close enough to the Soviet positions, they can charge and overrun them. It would be like the old days, but such a charge is extremely dangerous. Nevertheless, his 2nd Squadron successfully moves into position on the flank of the hill without being spotted. The men draw their sabers and walk their horses forward. A walk turns into a trot, and then the famous order, Carica, charge, rings out. In a wild gallop,
That looks very intimidating and scary. So I guess I can understand, looking at stuff like that, how you might spook the enemy. That looks more intimidating than tanks and stuff, for sure. I don't know why. They don't have the same intensity, I guess, as you see with these horses. I'm sure the horses are faster than a tank probably would be in this kind of situation. Yeah, I mean, you would feel pretty overwhelmed if that was coming at you, even if you had a machine gun.
Italian cavalrymen stampede into the perplexed Soviet defenders, hacking from the saddle with their sabers and throwing grenades into the trenches. The horsemen jump the Soviet lines. Despite the moments of stunned surprise, the Soviets do react quickly, turning their machine guns on the oncoming Italians. Dozens of mounts are cut down by automatic fire, but the Italians have real momentum. The 4th Squadron is sent in as support, while the 3rd attacks from the other flank to envelop the enemy. Soon enough, 2 Soviet battalions are destroyed and a 3rd dispersed. 150 Soviets have been killed, around 300 wounded, and 600 more taken prisoner. The Savoia lose 32 men killed and 52 wounded, with more than 100 horses killed. It is one last glorious display of cavalry power. Although cavalry will remain useful in other roles until the end of the war and even beyond, their military value is diminished in the face of modern weaponry. Centuries of horsemen ruling over the battlefields of the world have come to an end.
Okay, so I for one am glad that cavalry with horses has come to an end because of modern warfare. That idea that animals don't have any choice in the matter, you know, and they're just, I mean, I guess if you're drafted, you don't either, but they don't know what's going on, you know? It's just like that innocence of animals being kind of thrust into that sort of situation. I do have a couple of things that we can discuss really quickly, some questions that I have for you. So these are some notes that I took during the video. So I thought that it was pretty cool that the Russians went with the method of breeding and raising the horses on the steppe out in the wild in the conditions that they would probably be expected to, you know, go to battle in. And such a contrast from the Russians who, you know, did a more like a Western approach, as he said, I guess being raised in like barns and just like really kind of sheltered, I guess. It does sound like the Soviets had the smarter idea as far as that goes, but you know, Germany probably didn't have the same sort of conditions that Russia had anyway. If even if the horses were raised out in the wild, you know, it still probably wouldn't have prepared them for Russian weather and stuff. So he did kind of talk about like the reasons that cavalry were used, terrain, the mobility. I did think about that too. The horses are probably a lot faster. He said that, you know, they can go like 60 kilometers into the enemy territory, which is astounding to me. Like, I don't know if that's possible with like tanks and trucks and stuff, because those are probably a lot more conspicuous, right, than horses are. But I would think that horses would be kind of conspicuous too. Like, how do you hide yourself from the enemy? Because horses are not small, you know, and they can make noise when they run and stuff. So I don't know, but obviously they were able to do it. Big advantage with that. And then of course, the other thing I had thought about too that he brought up was the lack of, you know, need for gasoline and stuff, which we kind of have seen issues with that in the recent war happening over in Ukraine, where Russia was having some issues with like gasoline supplies for their tanks and stuff towards the beginning of the war. That kind of just like pointed out how important that is, you know, to be able to transport that stuff. And if you can eliminate the need to do that, then I guess that can be helpful. He did answer my question a bit with talking about like Italy and Romania. So those are two additional countries. He might have mentioned one or two others that also used cavalry. So it kind of seemed like cavalry going into World War II was quite a bit more widespread than I thought it was. And maybe that's just because, I don't know, Europe maybe has a little bit more tradition with cavalry and stuff. Not that obviously the US used it in the Civil War, and I guess in the Spanish-American War around the turn of the century, but I'm not sure it was so much ingrained in the US military as it was in Europe, because it was more of like just a traditional thing, I guess, in warfare in Europe. So I guess I can understand in a way it might be more prolific there, but it's still like, this is a part of World War II that I was never exposed to growing up. I'd never heard about until I started this channel, basically. I think asked about this thing right here. I think I asked about this like during the Alexander the Great videos, maybe some Napoleon ones too, but the idea that horses can just like charge into battle with all the chaos going on and not get spooked, basically, is fascinating. And that you can train horses to, you know, be used to that stuff. However, I would think that once you introduce things like machine guns and stuff, that just kind of like ups the level of, you know, noise and chaos a little bit. So part of me would think that the horses would have a higher chance of being spooked in that sort of situation. Obviously, they were able to still charge through all of that, so they must have been able to train the horses in some way. I don't know how they did it. You know, maybe they just would shoot machine guns in the air around the horses, and they, you know, just to get them used to the sound and stuff. But if you guys know the answer to that question, let me know down in the comments. I would appreciate it. But yeah, so that was a very interesting video. If you guys have any other info that you want to expand upon down in the comments, I'll have a look at that. I'll also be curious to know, how do you guys think about cavalry? You know, if you're a cavalry enthusiast, do you still wish that horses were used in warfare just for the tradition of it, or Do you kind of feel like I do and you're kind of glad that we're past the point of needing to use horses in war? Anyway, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done that yet. I also have social media here if you want to check any of this stuff out. All the links are in the description and the pinned comment. And I also have Patreon. All of this stuff that you see here on the screen is over on Patreon. Go check it out. A lot of additional content that I do not put up here on YouTube. But Roger here and I thank you guys, as always, for watching. Stay tuned for more videos like this coming up, and we will see you next time.